I have the pleasure of sitting here with Mike and Doc. Gentlemen, tell us who you are.
My name is Don Woerner. I'm a veterinarian here in the Yellowstone Valley. Been here since 1968, mostly dealing with ranchers and their cattle, although a little of everything, including zoo animals. And I love the area. I love the history of the area. It's a wonderful place. My wife and I picked to spend our life.
Awesome. And Mike has been in some of my videos before, Mike Penfold here.
Mike Penfold from Billings.
And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay.
Pick his brain a little bit, would
Hey,
you?
Don, I'd say it was about 1996. You gave me diaries of the Bozeman Trail. And you had been working with Susan Badger Doyle. I don't know the history of where you got connected with Susan.
I've had a small airplane, a Cessna 182, and somehow she found out that I had an airplane and that we could see remnants of the tracks of the Bozeman Trail. And I don't remember how we definitely communicated. We were at a meeting in Rock Springs, Wyoming, of the Oregon Trail Association, and Susan was there, and I was there with my family, and I know we got communicated there, and then she came up to this area, and we flew the trail in places.
Did you guys get out on the ground any with her?
Oh, yes, quite a bit, yeah.
Because I'm impressed with the degree to which she seems like she's been out on the ground at spots on the trail. So I've been curious of how she got out there.
Well, I know when her and I were together, a lot of those people out there that ranch in that area were my clients. And so I had spent time in there. And I also had a very strong interest in bison, buffalo. I like to call them buffalo, and I think most of the native people do too. And there are herds out there on the north end of the Bighorn Mountains, and there's also a large private buffalo herd out there. And we call an area we call the Grapevine, and I used to go out and fly over Fort Smith, and you can see the outline of the fort very distinctly with an airplane. There's a landing field there, and you can land and explore the area. And that's where they crossed the Bighorn, and then they went on either toward Billings, or they took the shortcut across country toward Absaroka in there.
I've been told you can see the trail much better in the springtime. Is that?
Well, I believe that's true, because the vegetation is lighter if you start in the early spring. Mm-hmm. And you can even see it through plowed fields. I've noticed it through. You can see remnants of it, like a shadow. You can follow it through fence lines, and a lot of it parallels or goes right along with county roads, and because that was a good way to get across the country. And at first they came down toward the Yellowstone, but the Yellowstone, the time they reached here was still high water. Maybe it was starting to go down, but you don't cross the Yellowstone with a wagon in Billings at that time. And another thing that fascinated me was Susan provided me with some diaries that talked about buffalo in this area, and some of the descriptions of large herds of buffalo in the Yellowstone Valley, right where we are right now. We're in the center of Billings. These buffalo were here. They could see them when they came over the divide and started to come down toward the river. Then you mentioned the motorcycle track over here. As you get closer and closer to the river, it gets tougher and tougher to take a wagon down there. Even a horse is a challenge. And so they started going across country and cutting through staying high. And then they ended up crossing the Clark's Fork. And earlier, Lewis and Clark came through here, and well, actually Clark came through. Lewis, they separated, but and a guy named who was he? Sergeant Pryor of the Lewis and Clark expedition. He was in charge of the horse herd, and they brought that horse herd across and down through the Yellowstone Valley, and there were buffalo, and these horses were used to running buffalo, but they were loose horses, and those horses would go out there and chase the buffalo, and it created quite a bit of pandemonium, the way they describe it in the diaries. Finally, and I don't know if this was the reason they made this choice, but they knew the river at this point sort of heads north and northeast, and they knew their latitude, and they knew they could go cross country. So Sergeant Pryor crossed the Yellowstone with the horse herd and took off cross country to later meet them, and Clark went northeast. And anyway, this was some of the earlier stuff that was really interesting, and then the Bozeman Trail came later, much later, after following the Civil War and right in that time and during.
You know, it's kind of interesting. Our friend Ralph Saunders, who's done so much careful work on Clark's trip down through the Yellowstone River, concluded that where Pryor crossed the horses is probably exactly where the Bozeman Trail came down in 1864. They used the same logical route.
Yes.
So that's kind of a historic. And of course, the pictograph cave goes back 9,000 years of people there. So the Indian people were coming back and forth in the same place. You got a buffalo tie clip on there, Don. I don't know of anybody who's worked harder than you have to preserve wild buffalo, bison, or whatever term you want to use, here in our countryside. Is the Bozeman Trail where you started getting interested in bison, or was it your veterinary work?
Well, it was my veterinary work primarily. When I was in veterinary school, we had a big bison in a squeeze chute. I couldn't believe that guy. He was huge, and when he breathed that metal squeeze chute, he could make it move. And it has hydraulics, and holy smokes, this guy is strong. And as I became a practicing veterinarian here in town and working with cattle ranchers, a few of them raised bison, and then more and more. And the Bozeman Trail, they talk about them a lot because they were still around in the 1860s and the early 70s up in the northern plains, but they were being eliminated. It's a dark chapter in our American history that we came over and did that. But
they're still here, Don.
They're still here, and so are the Indian people, and they're coming back, and so are the Indian people, and it's encouraging. Another thing that I really enjoyed about the Bozeman Trail is that there was two different trails. I mean, there was a Bozeman Trail, and then there was the Bridger Trail. And Jim Bridger was an early trapper in the area, and later on he even started a fort, and he helped the people that were migrating by wagon trains across the country, going to Salt Lake, going to California, and clear up here into Montana. And he really felt that we should go through the Bighorn Basin, but the Bighorn Basin doesn't have near the water
Yeah, harder country.
Harder country. The Indians weren't as upset about that. They were upset when we were out here on the east side of the Bighorns.
Indians knew good country, didn't they?
Well, they did, and that was
Or
their buffalo herd, and they'd been promised that. And we, of course, we reneged on our promise, and we're right through the heart of their buffalo country. And even today, this country is great buffalo country, and we're bringing this animal back, and my gosh, this animal is a valuable animal. Not only is it important to the culture of the Native people, but it is important to our history, and it's fun to see it coming back and see the people, actually the Native people bringing it back. The Indians are bringing it back, and they're doing a good job of caring for it and the land, and we're learning how to that there's ways we can live with this animal and actually utilize it, because they're very good eating.
They're good eating.
Mm-hmm. They are, and they're just a marvelous animal. Of course, they talk about them on the Bozeman Trail. Several references that as they came along on their wagons with a buffalo grazing close by, and they talk about shooting them. I hate to hear that, but they just would shoot them from the wagon. Why would you just do that? I mean,
Kill them. Florence, what was the name? Her diary. So they're over on the North Platte. They're coming up. They're meat hungry. They're eating bacon now, and they really would like some meat. They shoot a buffalo, and one of the doctors goes and takes the scalp off of it, collects it, but they don't eat any of the meat, and they haven't. They're new to the prairie, and they haven't caught on yet.
That's right. We come over here and think we know it all, and we're finding that the Native people in this country had a very good culture and a good way of interacting with their environment. It didn't match ours, and we were still struggling with it. Last week I was in the Black Hills, and we're bringing back buffalo down there, and there's a group of people called the Intertribal Buffalo Council that brings these animals to various people in the tribes, and even individual ranchers are starting to ranch them. All of this ties together. The Bozeman Trail, we come up there, we go to the gold mines in Montana. Another fabulous story talking about bovine critters is Story's cattle drive from Texas to Montana. And he brought cattle up here. He went down there, he made some money in the gold fields, goes down there and buys cattle and sets up and brings them up. The movie Lonesome Dove borrows from that. That movie is...
That's my favorite movie, Don.
Oh, I love that movie. I do, and I love the sound of it. I can just play it in the background.
Me too. That's great music.
Although it's bringing cattle up to buffalo country, it's just got the feel of you're coming up to this open country, and it's a fabulous story.
The good thing about Nelson Story's life is true.
Yeah.
And you don't have to embellish it any. I mean, Lonesome Dove embellishes a few things, but
It does.
Nelson's story doesn't need to be embellished. He was an amazing character doing amazing things and changing the country. I mean, for better or for worse.
Well, those are the kind of people that I hope we have more of nowadays. I'd like to see more cooperation today among people, and but Nelson's story, the story of that Story cattle drive. They stopped along the Bozeman Trail, and of course, when you bring that many animals, they get their fuel from the countryside. They got to eat grass as they go.
They have a little water too.
And water. That was one of the nice things about the Bozeman Trail. It had pretty good water all the way in most places compared to some of the Oregon Trail and the Bridget Trail.
Don, we above between the Stillwater River and where the trail comes down into the Yellowstone, Nelson Story, so the rancher told us, brought his cattle to this big area up there, beautiful grass, good water, because they'd seen a lot of Indian signs down below, so they thought they'd keep the cattle up high. I hope it's a true story, I suspect it is. But they built some rock cairns up there where they could be in defensive positions. Have you seen those?
Yes,
I bet you've seen them from the air probably too.
We've had, perhaps from the air, I've been on the ground, and we had a fire up there several years ago that kind of helped expose a little of that area. And I believe that is based on truth, that story. And they had very good repeating rifles, and he was set to make the trip, and he was strong enough to lead and get it done. He got those animals, eventually got them clear up into north of the Yellowstone.
Martha, what's her name? She's a great granddaughter of Nelson Story, and she told me that her grandfather took her up there to those monuments and told her that that's what they were.
Wow.
So I don't know if that's considered good confirmation or not, but it's good enough for me, Don.
Oh, me too. Me too. I know. I think that was part of the story, and I believe that is.
The rancher who owns that took us up to a monument. It's about like this. I've got pictures of it. And apparently, back early, there was a rock with Nelson Story's signature on it. It's gone, but now there are rocks there that go back to the early 1900s, maybe late 1800s. So the cowboys have been using that great pasture up there for some time. So, anyway.
Yeah, and that's an interesting. You mentioned rocks, and you mentioned all these sheep herder monuments that we see through the country. You mentioned, or you can think of the rocks that formed a guideline or for buffalo captures or cliffs, and so it's really fun to look at teepee rings, to look around and see all of this stuff. It just fires your imagination. You can imagine what's happened. You can actually read about it, and that's what I love so much about this country. We have so many things to be. It's been here for thousands of years, and people have been using these trails, and today the trails are maybe are paved even, but
they're still there, aren't they?
They're still there, yeah.
Well, every day you go out, you find something new, and usually you don't have the answer. Just another big question mark. Who was it that did this, and why? How come this is here? It's always fun.
It certainly is.
I have a request, Doc. Would you talk about the kind of animals that they would have found along the trail when they were traveling from Wyoming over to Virginia City? How did they get food? Were they killing their own beef? What?
Let me ask you. I'll ask you a question. Don, in your work on the trail, people use the landscape for subsistence as they travel the trail. What do you think they were generally using? They brought bacon, I know, and probably beans and some things like that, but.
Wow, I know that there is it's a landscape where you can certainly survive with more than just meat. I mean, there's vegetation, there's tubers. I don't know how much the people that came across on the trail understood how to live off the land besides harvesting some of your larger ungulates, the buffalo or elk or deer.
Antelope, I see that, and I see antelope in the diaries quite a bit.
Yeah, antelope would be a pretty common one because antelope are curious anyway, and they're it's something that I know they would have subsisted on.
Indians well understood when these trails went through that the game would disappear over time, didn't they?
Yes.
Yeah, so they really understood the impact of a road through their hunting grounds.
They did. I mean, we had the Oregon Trail since the 1840s, and from what I read, you could tell when you came upon the Oregon Trail because of the way the land was grazed down, and later on, almost all the watering points were polluted because people didn't know about sanitation as much as they should have, and we had a lot of deaths due to
We did.
bacterial diseases that live in the water, and we didn't know how to keep that water clean. And that was one of the nice things about the Bozeman Trail. It came in the 60s, and going through there. There's a lot of fresh water. You went on some of the trail rides, and some of those creeks. Even
Beautiful.
today, it's beautiful.
You know, you got
It's
the
a
beautiful clear streams coming out of the Bighorns and the Absaroka Mountains that just refresh all of that.
Really nice, really nice. And trout, yeah.
And fish.
Yes, Crook did a lot of trout fishing down around Sheridan, Wyoming, when he kind of got his butt kicked there just before the Custer battle. Of course, this came later. This was in the 1870s, but they came down and kind of thumped on him a little bit, and the Indians did, and he went back to the Sheridan area and went fishing, and Custer, he come in from the east, and he got his butt kicked too.
Crook got he attacked an Indian village that same year, early on, and they chased the Indians out of the village, attacked them in a freezing morning in March, burned their teepees, burned all their food. And then these Indians gathered up a few horses and their firearms and came back and knocked the hell out of them. I mean, they didn't realize they were facing the toughest mounted warriors in the world.
Okay.
The Army did not realize who
Wow.
they were taking on.
Well, a lot of those folks were, a lot of the regular people in the Army barely knew how to ride a horse or shoot a rifle.
That's true too.
They were immigrants from country, they could barely speak English, and here they were put out there with an arrogant character like Custer, and Crook kind of knew what was going on. He'd been around a while, and he had some sympathy for the native people. The suffering is almost unbelievable. I recently came back from Wounded Knee in South Dakota, and what they did to those people, and what they demanded to put them on reservations, and then they didn't follow through with feeding them, and these people were starving. They had to try to feed their families, and we need to understand what happened, and we need to learn from it, and we're still in the process of learning.
Kind of a sad piece of our history, and I agree with you. We still got something to learn, don't we?
We do. We really do. That brings me to just talking about restoring the buffalo, because it restores the cultures that we tried to wipe out with some of these boarding schools and putting them on reservations, and then the Dawes Act, the General Allotment Act of 1887. Was a terrible thing that we took their land. We ended up between 1887 and 1934. We took 2/3 of the land base of the tribe, of the various reservations in the West, and so they're struggling to develop buffalo pastures, but they're doing it. And we're getting animals from Yellowstone now that have been quarantined and certified brucellosis free, and we're transferring them to tribes, and the tribes are managing them well. They're learning. We're relearning how to work with, because in a few thousand years ago, the people depended on knowing how buffalo act, knowing how they stay together in family groups and all this, and they utilized that in their hunting and in their procurement of the buffalo for survival. So we're relearning what people knew about this animal, and thank goodness we didn't wipe it out completely.
It's not uncontroversial either, is it?
Oh no, there's a lot of controversy, and there's still a lot of struggle, and I have a lot of respect for cattle ranchers. My family's part of my family's cattle ranching. My whole family go back 3 or 4 generations, but we didn't realize what we had, and we're still learning how to live on the land. We're still and how to make it pay economically. And so I think it's important to study all this stuff and to talk. If we have different opinions, that's fine, but let's at least respect each other.
Yeah.
And listen to each other.
Well, Don, I so appreciate the work you're doing with Indian people to help that process along. And I know, I really understand the amount of energy you put into that, the amount of travel.
I feel it's a real pleasure to get a chance to work with these folks, because I've never worked with a group of people that are they laugh and joke and they work hard. I mean, and we've been working hard to develop a quarantine program where we get healthy animals and we transfer them in a healthy way, and then we all work together to figure out how to manage these animals, how do they live on the landscape. We don't want to make them into real industrialized animals. We want to keep their wildness, and you can. Actually, the buffalo is one of the most adaptive creatures I've ever seen. They can live in a fairly restricted environment, or they can live out there in the open where there's grizzly bears and cougars and wolves and
deep snow.
And yeah, they know they face a storm, and that's what I like about buffalo. They face their storm. They face
They put their face into the storm?
Yeah, they do. And they get up on a hill, and that's the way it's most comfortable, and because they're so adapted to our country, what we have. We have to kind of take care of our cows, but I like our cows. They're kind of funny looking. They got a flat back and they kind of got a pot belly. And they don't have that nice hump and all that fuzzy fur. But they're okay.
And they're kind of good to eat too.
Well, they are good to eat, and the people that raise them are good people,
Yeah.
and hardworking people. But we also need buffalo ranchers, and we need wild buffalo.
Don, we started out talking about the Bozeman Trail. Now we're talking about
yeah, and that's what really got me interested in the Bozeman Trail, and that's why the Bozeman Trail had some controversy, because doggone it, it was right through the heart of the Sioux buffalo country, and Red Cloud was mad, and I don't blame him, and so I don't know.
Thank you.